How do you advise even a government to do where to start?
Cybersecurity is presenting challenges to governments around the world. It is absolutely a global problem.
We are not very rich like Australia.
It's how do you define success? You will never stop cybercrime. Even SMS phishing. All of this is driven by money.
It's about exploring. It's about thinking sort of like outside the box. Very warm welcome to Sri Lanka, Professor Haskell Dowland. Am I right?
It is indeed.
Or Paul, rather.
It is.
So really a very warm welcome to Sri Lanka and to the SLVLOG team. And thank you so much for agreeing to do this session. So before we start the topic today, I'd like to introduce you to the audience of the SLVLOG. But let's start with your acronyms. I think that's the that's the best area to start who you are, what you do, what you're doing in Sri Lanka. So this is a chance, sort of an opportunity that we got. We didn't plan for this, so we'll take this conversation wherever it takes us and see what we come up with. But so let's start with your acronyms. There's few things that I've added since I last sort of like knew you as my professor when I was doing my undergraduate degree at Plymouth University.
Indeed, back in the UK.
Yes. And so over to you for your acronyms. Explain your acronyms, please, and also a brief background of who you are and what you do.
Sure. So I'm Prof. Dowland. I'm a Professor of Cybersecurity Practice at Edith Cowan University in Australia. So we really are covering the globe today. So yourself based in the UK, we're managing to meet somehow in Sri Lanka, and yet I've come over from Australia. As you can probably tell by the accent, and certainly the listeners will be able to tell, I started off my life in the UK. So I did most of my adult life in Plymouth at Plymouth University, and was really a lifelong student. So starting off with a bachelor's degree at Plymouth, I then progressed to do a PhD, and before you knew it, I was an academic. So
did you do your bachelor's in computer science or cybersecurity?
In neither. So we're going back a few years, as you might be able to tell from the grey hair. But the degree I took was actually called a Computing and Informatics degree.
Oh, right.
So this really does predate what we might consider as modern computing degrees.
So that's pre-information security as well, isn't it, then?
It is indeed. Yes. So when I started off, there were no information security degrees. We did have a networking degree. It had some very strange titles that include telecommunications. And that's something that actually we have in common from the UK and Australia. Both institutions were at the forefront of cybersecurity long before it was ever called cybersecurity. But that's sort of jumping a few years ahead. And as I said, I started my career off at Plymouth University, and that's where we met when you were there at the beginning as a PhD student. And I really absolutely loved the UK, and the university there was an incredible place to grow up and to develop. But a fantastic opportunity came along to take an associate dean role, and that saw me travel over to Australia back in 2016, and really never looked back since.
And you love living there and with your family as well, am I right?
I did. The whole family moved over. It was a difficult transition particularly for the children. Wrenching them away from the UK, but Australia is a very interesting place to live. It's, in certain regards, it's a few years behind certainly the UK and many other parts of the world. And that's both in terms of the sort of attitudes and the environment that we're living in. But it's a beautiful place in the world to live and work. Now, I've not lived in Sri Lanka, so I can't comment on the
You're almost as good as a local.
I've been here a few times, but I certainly wouldn't consider myself in any way local. Couldn't tell you the way to anywhere. But it's a beautiful place to come and visit, and I come here quite regularly. So this is my third or fourth trip.
3 to 5 times a year you come to the Sri Lanka,
yeah?
So that's really good, because when we take the conversation to our topic today, which we'll go into in a minute, that will be interesting because you can compare Australia to Sri Lanka in those similarities that I know that Australia is a very well developed country. However, we can find some of those aspects where there's few people, you said, and then scammers we were talking about earlier. So we'll take the conversation over there. So yeah, let's go back to your acronyms.
So, I mean, really where to start? I mean, we have the academic acronyms. So obviously I've got my degrees. So I was awarded a Bachelor of Science from Plymouth University as my first degree, my bachelor's. I then went on to secure my PhD, but actually in between, I also did a postgraduate certificate of education.
Of course you did.
Because I had nothing else to do at the time. It was actually a requirement. So as a new academic, we had to do a teaching and learning qualification.
And then that's the same in Australia, is it? If you're an academic, do you have to have teacher qualification? Because the reason I'm asking that is we don't have that in Sri Lanka yet.
So
it's not a necessity.
It's not a thing in most universities, but it is moving in that direction.
Yeah.
So in fact, we're talking about that very need right at the moment to really upskill. We provide courses, and a lot of that covers the same kind of groundwork that you might have in a grad cert of education. But putting a bit more formality around things is certainly the direction we're traveling in. And I think we're going to see that same kind of change here as well, because there's a need and certainly a desire to attach credible recognition to individuals.
In Sri Lanka?
I think so. Yeah. I think we're seeing that, particularly in the university sector, but I think we'll see that much more widespread into the future.
So the next one I have is Max Senior.
So I'm quite involved in professional societies, professional organisations. And back in the UK, I was a member of the British Computer Society, the BCS. And for those who might be aware, the BCS is connected with a global network of societies, of which the Computer Society of Sri Lanka is one of them. But in Australia, we have the ACS. And as a member of the ACS, you're entitled to have the post-nominal initials. But I'm actually a senior member of the ACS. Again, I'm sure that's because of the grey hair. But it's sort of a recognition of your standing within the industry and the dedication and commitment that you've made over a number of years. So I've not been in Australia very long, so I'm hoping in the future to be elevated to the status of fellow, and that's something that I received in the UK a few years ago from the BCS. So you'll see that there's a few acronyms there that relate to professional societies, in the same way that we have the IP3 PP, I think it is, which is again to do with professional standards and qualifications, and that's a global standard that's applied by computer societies.
And the FBCS.
So that one is the Fellow of the British Computer Society.
Oh yeah, the one. And FHE, I know. It's a fellow higher education academy, isn't it? Yes.
Indeed.
And then FISA.
So in Australia, we have a dedicated society for information security. So in the UK, there is a group, and I actually can't remember the acronym for that one, but there is a group there that basically provides a sort of framework for standards for cybersecurity. And in Australia, it is the Australian Information Security Association. And a couple of years ago, so I was a member of ASA, but a couple of years ago, they nominated me for a fellowship. I think I was one of the first academics in Australia, but amongst the first 30 or so to be awarded across the nation. Wow. So it was a real big honour. I was delighted to receive that. And
well deserved as well, if I remember correctly, learning from you. So yes. So also, it says, I was looking at you, I was digging a bit of information to be current and to do this session today. And I came across that you're one of the top 10 authors. Is it you have reached over 3 million readers? And is that right? And
yeah. So what we're looking at there is The Conversation.
Yes.
A specific example. So The Conversation is a global news website, and in many countries, there is a dedicated team of editors for The Conversation. And it's a really interesting group to be writing for. So I've been quite actively involved with them. So I'm ECU's most published author. I've done about 67 articles with them over the last 7 years. And I'm actually just about to tip over into the 4 million readership level. So we've actually gone up slightly. And the conversation takes current news stories, new research, for example, changing trends and behaviours, and writes it from an academic perspective. So in order to write for the conversation, you have to be a writer. You have to be an academic. And the idea is that they bring people with academic credibility together with journalists to create hard-hitting news stories. And it gives you an opportunity as an academic to share the knowledge that you have in a way that's accessible to a lay audience. And
so it's a tiny bit like what the SLVLOG team is trying to do in Sri Lanka, to be honest, because even though it's in the inception stages, what they're doing is bringing experts like yourself into the sort of getting into the audience and making them aware and understanding the trends, and making sure even the governments, we are really at a very, very sort of like primary stages of the data evolution, if you want to call it, or technology evolution. So every little helps. As if I was working for Tesco, I would have said that. But so I think the audience can pretty much guess by now what our topic's going to be. It's about cybersecurity, and in particular, I want to ask you about what sort of advice that you would have from yes, you're working and living in the Australia, and you're an expert, and is it your vice chancellor Steve
Chapman?
Yes, I was listening to him where he was saying that you become the go-to person for the Australian media, but that I think that has a real impact when experts like yourselves talk about cybersecurity and sort of like that sort of specialist subjects. And so we'll talk about a little bit about the governance and the government side, what a government could do, because I want to touch upon that, because we are just waiting for eagerly waiting for a presidential election. Mm-hmm. And if it does happen, loads of promises are being made right now, where we're told that, the politicians make a lot of promises. And what we want to make sure is that the public understand that are these deliverables, do they come with some sort of data backed or some sort of reasoning behind it, or are they just sort of like pipe dreams, So and then we'll talk about scammers. I mean, we were talking about scammers earlier. Mm-hmm. Just like you said that Australia has a similar problem with online scammers, and we are inundated with scammers. It's a terrible problem, and it's almost like a pandemic going. It's epidemic, isn't it? And so we talk about what people could do, and also organizations, how they could maybe better prepare or prevent. And then we will take the conversation. Maybe this is something that I got after doing a few podcasts with the SLVLOG team, that people are desperate to get into cybersecurity. They are understanding right now there is something, but they're not sure where to start. So we'll take the conversation a little bit there and then where does one start? The conversation will naturally evolve if that's all right with you.
Of course. Yeah.
So advising the government. Do you have any case studies? How do you all do cyber? How do you tackle cybersecurity? It is a complex subject. It is broad, it's a broad subject. So how do you advise even a government to do where to start?
So, you're right. Cybersecurity is presenting challenges to governments around the world. It is absolutely a global problem. So when we think about cybersecurity, we often think about hackers.
Yes.
And our mental model goes to the person in the darkened room with a hoodie, huddled over a keyboard, tapping away. And whilst that does happen, you do have people who are like that. The reality is that it is a commercial operation. And one of the things we need to sort of move away from is treating cybersecurity as a problem that happens to other people, and treating it as something that is what I would call the script kiddie, the person who's got a little bit of knowledge of the tools and hides away in a corner and plays and tinkers. And the reality is that what lives behind a lot of the cybersecurity incidents these days is organised crime. It's not in the same way that you might think of the mafia, for example.
Yep.
It's the fact that there are teams of people working collaboratively together and trying to defraud individuals, organizations, and whole countries. And it's the full spectrum of threats and risks. So it may well be that you're dealing with an attack one day that is a relatively simple scam campaign. So sending out phishing messages via SMS or email and seeing who clicks on the link. The next day, you could be investigating an issue to do with a business email compromise where a transaction has been modified and you're paying somebody into a different bank account. And you then go to the sort of more extreme cases, which is often where we perhaps think of state-sponsored attacks, where it is direct attacks against infrastructure and operational technology. And at the same time, we're dealing with ransomware incidents in organizations where data is being encrypted and the scammers are asking for Bitcoin to unlock their data. So treating cybercrime as a serious issue is one thing, but we have to recognize that it is actually many things. And the impact of cybercrime is felt by absolutely everybody. So either it's a direct impact because you have personally been affected by an attack, or you are coincidental, consequential damage, that your account has been compromised, that your data has been stolen, that the bank you deal with has been compromised, and your email provider has had an attack. There's so many ways that technology impacts on our day-to-day lives that there is nobody who is immune or isolated.
And that itself is really interesting because the complexity makes it like, how do you address it? It has to be in different ways. And so how Sri Lanka is a really resource constrained. We are not very rich like Australia.
And we're not getting it right.
But also countries like yours and UK, we're struggling. So what are the chances of somebody like in Sri Lanka, the government succeeding in anything remotely, like addressing these issues, because it does affect everybody and the government has a responsibility to tackle this. But how do you do that where the resources are very limited?
So I guess a fundamental question is, how do you define success? Because you will never stop cybercrime. And let's be honest, we haven't stopped shoplifting. We haven't stopped people stealing cars. So the idea that we can stop any form of crime from happening is a fallacy. It's never going to happen, because as long as there is a financial benefit in engaging in the crime, you will always have criminals prepared to take that risk.
Just like traditional crime.
Absolutely. It is just another form of traditional crime. And we really have to stop treating cyber as something really special. It isn't. It's just the evolution. And if we look at the kind of scam campaigns that go out via SMS and email, how is that any different to the letters we used to receive from unknown people, the postcards popped through the mail that would try and sell us things?
I remember my mum telling me about a scam that she got. She was caught. It was in the newspaper. Mm-hmm. So send some money to receive a miracle, some sort of an ointment or something to that effect. And she did. But there's what you're saying is there's nothing different to 40 years ago. That's happening to now. Somebody receiving a phishing email. It's just the mode has changed.
It's the mode of communication. It's the volume as well. So that's another big issue. Is if you wind the clock back a few years and we think about the postal deliveries we used to receive of scams, the constraining factor there was cost. There was an actual cost to distributing that message. Now with email, it is almost zero cost. And even SMS phishing, you can buy systems that will send hundreds of thousands of messages an hour across 50 or 60
So the costs
cards.
are coming down for the criminals?
Absolutely. And they can just ping 100 million phone numbers in a matter of minutes. And if one of them responds, it will cover the cost of the infrastructure and the time and effort. But the chances are they'll get a few hundred, maybe even a few thousand people who will engage. And it's the return on investment that they're looking for. And all of this is driven by money. It's all about profit.
And how would a government what could a government do to prevent, at least, I know that we agreed that it cannot be completely stopped. That's
You can
ludicrous.
reduce it.
So we could reduce it, yeah. So how do we manage that? What would you say that the government should think about?
So it starts with education, as is so often the case in these scenarios. And of course, you might think I would say that being an academic, but education is absolutely critical, because the vast majority of cases of cybercrime or cybersecurity incidents affect the individual. It's an individual person, the average individual, who gets targeted, who then falls prey and loses something, whether that's finance or control of a system. So education is critical, because so many people now have access to the technologies that are then used to attack them. But if you walk into a computer shop and buy a computer, if you go into a phone shop and buy a mobile phone, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a single shop that would give you any advice on how to use that device securely. So we know that that's a big problem, and we know the advice isn't out there. So programs of education are critical, and it does happen. So I've been flouting around in Sri Lanka for the last few days, and I've spent a lot of time in taxis, and I've been hearing the local radio stations, and they do run educational adverts that talk about scams and the dangers.
Yeah.
So there is a move in that direction. Funnily enough, I was in Singapore recently and heard very similar adverts on the radio there. So
it's more of a collaboration. It's becoming more of collaboration, and I think it has to be, isn't it? Because a single entity or single country can't tackle it. It's a global pandemic, global problem. So we have to get together. Is what you're saying?
We do see that happening. So there's a lot of collaboration, particularly via law enforcement. So when it comes to the cybersecurity incidents, and maybe we'll talk about this a bit later, that there's a huge resistance to reporting cyber incidents. There's a feeling of shame attached to it. And one of the things I talk about very regularly is that there should be no shame attached to this. There is no stigma. Individuals fall prey for this for many reasons and should not be concerned about reporting the incidents they encounter. And all of that data gets fed back into national societies. So in Sri Lanka, you have the Sri Lanka CERT. And I've worked with them. I've visited them on a few occasions. Massively under-resourced. They need more bodies to be able to investigate cases. But that, again, is a global problem. If I'm in Australia and you talk to the Australian CERT equivalent, if you talk to the Information Commissioner, they need more resource, because these cases are going up and up and up, and the impact at a national level is significant. We're talking about $1 trillion cybercrime industry.
Is it per attack, or is it in our entirety?
Globally, it's estimated to be in the order of more than $1 trillion. I've not seen the latest figures, and in Australia, it's measured in billions. So we big did impacts.
Previously with Bruno and we did 2 podcasts on awareness and education, and CERT actually had seen the program, and they got back to Bruno, and they had actually told that was apparently the first time the media sort of spoke about education and awareness in that way for sort of end users. So we looked at the end user perspective, but it's really interesting you saying that, because me saying that is a bit different. I'm a local, so advising in Sinhala, but coming from you, I'm really glad to hear that the approach that we took is what you're advising as well.
It is absolutely critical, and this is universal.
Yes.
So if I'm in Australia, I'm having the same conversations, and we're currently running TV adverts focusing on scams.
Yeah.
So it's actually an Australian government initiative, and it will probably continue for years to come in terms of the need to uplift education. But in addition to that sort of public-facing promotional activity, it also needs to be drilled home at school level. And that, again, is absolutely critical, because the generation that's currently going through school have grown up with the technology around them and are seeing enormous developments happening, like ChatGPT, the generative AI era. And they need to be as aware of cybersecurity as anyone else.
You don't even need to create an attack, or you didn't even need that basic the technical knowledge anymore, because you could use something like ChatGPT to get you the code that you need, and then it's the half the job is done with one single click, isn't it?
And in fact, we're seeing generative AI being used to create campaigns for scammers. So we know that there are scam teams who use ChatGPT to create scripts for their call centers. And we're probably not very far away from automated phishing. So at the moment, a lot of the phishing attacks, a lot of the scams rely upon an initial connection with a person. That typically leads them to a website to enter some details. It often ends in phone calls and communication exchanges. That's actually quite costly for the scammers. So we know that they're already working on generative AI technologies of voice substitution. So there have been campaigns where an actor has been engaging with their target, but doing so using voice translation software. So it presents a voice that is familiar to the end user by sampling video clips of people's personal networks.
Wow.
And we're not far off the video capability of that.
So I mean, hearing that even scares me. I'm in the field, I'm learning and I'm teaching that to an extent, not obviously not as high profile as you are. You taught me, among the others, but you taught me quite a lot. And but hearing that, even I get scared. It is a scary world out there. But what would you tell the end users? Everyone uses digital devices these days, but where should they start? How would they tackle this from an individual perspective?
So obviously the usual advice applies in terms of basic safeguards. So always making sure that you are using a safe, reliable network. So be very cautious about using public Wi-Fi. Thinking about your footprint on the internet and the breadcrumbs you leave behind for cyber criminals. So giving out personal information. One of the classic cyber recommendations still stands about passwords. Far too many people.
Steve would love to hear that.
Absolutely. So Steve Fennell, formerly from Plymouth, now up in Nottingham, has spent a lifetime looking at human factors of cybersecurity.
And he's my PhD supervisor as well. So yes,
and I saw him just a few weeks ago in the UK. But he's been talking about password practices for
decades,
a couple of decades at least. And we're still making the same mistakes. Every year, the top 10, top 100, top 1,000 passwords comes out. There's very little movement. And every year, we still hear stories of people who have deliberately used the same password on thousands of different systems and services and websites. And you're only as strong as the weakest link.
Where would an end user get? This is a question that the audience asks me sometimes when we do the podcast. What are the practical advices? Where would we get that information? So are there any free resources or something out there? I know that every sort of application, they have their own set of security advice, but is there a place that any user could go to get a bit of advice, regardless of the country they live in, specifically Sri Lankans?
So to be honest, it is actually really easy to find that advice. But if you don't have the confidence to go looking for it and to trust it, that can be a big challenge. But the reality is that there are loads of websites out there. If you just go to Google and do a search for cybersecurity tips, you'll find a million websites. A lot of banks have web pages dedicated to end user security. Obviously, they're oriented around banking activity, but they often have generic guidance and generic advice. And Sri Lanka Cert has got a number of resources that are available. But if you want to go a little bit further, there are some really good courses out there that are free. And if you just do a quick Google search for free cybersecurity courses, you'll find thousands and thousands of resources available from all sorts of providers. One of the best that I've come across is from Cisco, and that's through the Skills for All website. And that is a service that they provide, a public good, and almost all of the courses they provide there are sort of self-led, so they don't require you to go to a location, you don't have to follow an instructor, it's basically learn at your own speed. And you can also stop whenever you want.
Oh, right. So
when you've had enough.
Does that take you from like any end user, or do you have to have some sort of a technical knowledge to start those?
No, so their introduction to cyber courses are very, very basic. They really do start off with zero knowledge. However, if you then want to go a little bit further, they have got follow-on courses. And some of these even lead to micro-credentials or badges that you can add to your CV. But there are many providers of baseline cybersecurity end-user advice. And if you go to any of the big IT software companies, the Microsofts of this world, you'll find that they've got safe cyber practice guides that you can follow. But really, the fundamentals haven't changed in many, many years. And it's all about password practices. It's about making sure that your data and your devices are backed up, making sure you apply all your patches to systems. Fundamentally, those details have not changed.
And not posting unwanted stuff on social media, I think.
It's a good idea. At the moment, the risks are relatively low. So one of the challenges is that people will often use obvious information as things like password resets. So if you go to a website and you create an account, you might be asked to have a few security questions in case you ever forget your password. And if one of those questions is where were you born, and you have that on your Facebook profile, or where was your first job, and that's on your LinkedIn profile, or where's your favorite holiday destination, and that's all over Instagram, well, it's not going to be too hard to find out that information. So it's just about being a little bit cautious about the information you share. And sometimes you have to think like a criminal. Think about what would somebody do to find out the information that you currently use for security purposes, and maybe just being a little bit more selective over those things. But one thing to note is there's nothing wrong with recording this kind of information in a little notepad in the drawer by your computer. Yes, it's not the safest practice, but if your house is secure, then that notepad is quite safe and is much safer than having the same password on every single system that you visit.
Absolutely. So that really brings me to another area that I wanted to touch upon today. That's the lot of youngsters in countries like Sri Lanka. A lot of youngsters are really getting exposed to the outside world at the minute. And I think one of the reasons that you're here is as well, having the universities here, the presence here says that as well. And there's a demand for current technology, current education. And where would a typical Sri Lankan school student at school or secondary school, or let's say secondary school, where should they start if they want to look at cybersecurity as a career? First of all, is cybersecurity as a career? We talked about being criminal and probably getting into the mafia might be a bit lucrative, but is there a better way? Well. Yes, there's a lot of risks in that, but is there jobs in the cybersecurity field for a citizen of Sri Lanka, for example?
Absolutely. So cybersecurity is a step beyond the sort of traditional computing careers that we see. And certainly one of the big challenges that we face as a university is the recognition of cybersecurity as a career. So when you talk about cybersecurity, especially around the dinner table, if that conversation ever occurs, you can guarantee it's about the negative connotations. So if you're having a conversation about cybersecurity, it's probably because there's been something in the media about a cybersecurity attack. So there's a lot of association with negative emotion with cyber, and the perception is it's all about bad things.
And also a common misconception is like cybersecurity is all about technical aspects. Absolutely. And you have to be a techie or a geek, whatever you want to call it. You got to be one of them to be a cybersecurity expert or to build a career. How would you see that?
Coffee බොන්න තමයි ආස වතුර බොන්න කැමති නෑ පොෂ් මිනිස්සේ ලොකු අපුඩියක් දීලා පිළිගමු අපේ බ්‍රුනෝ දිවාට
පොඩ්කාස්ටිං වලට උනන්දු දක්වන ඔයාලට මාස්ටර් ක්ලාස් by බ්‍රූනෝ දිවාකර දැන් SLVLOG වෙබ් අඩවියෙන් ලබාගත හැක.
So again, I would absolutely say that's not the case. Yes, there are technical roles. So in cybersecurity, you can be an ethical hacker or a penetration tester. You can be a forensics analyst. You can be a security operations center analyst, working in one of the tiers. Yes, there are many, many technical roles within cybersecurity, and they're all very interesting, and some of them go really technically deep. But it's only one of the many careers. And if we sort of go back to where we started on the conversation, ultimately, cyber is about people. It's about criminals who are people who are engaging in criminal activities, and it's about individuals and organizations who are the victims of those attacks. And one of the key things in cyber is not dealing with just the technical aspect, it's dealing with the human factor. So in terms of careers, there's lots of opportunity to do cyber education, to do cyber uplift within organizations, to look at governance and strategy and policy. And it's pretty much like any other career. If you look at any particular role in an organization, there are different implementations of that role. So you may well be in a computing area, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to spend all of your time at a keyboard typing in code, for example. So those careers are there. There's definitely opportunities to do the technical stuff, but there's a huge demand for people who can be a bit more human focused. And one of the big challenges with many computing students is the fear of working with other people. It really has tended to attract solitary individuals historically, and people who perhaps don't have the ability to engage with others as effectively as we would like. In cyber, you have to. Cyber is all about the individual. So when something goes wrong, you're not phoning up and talking to a computer. You're talking to another human. And one of the things that we've seen work very successfully is people transitioning from non-computing, non-technical fields into cybersecurity. And a great example is nurses. So as nurses progress through their career, they often get burnt out. It's quite a strenuous, long-term career, but they don't tend to last for many decades in that particular area. And so they come with a very interesting set of skills. They are calm. They deal with stress. They deal with prioritization. So if you're in a busy ward, especially if you're working in accident and emergency, you have to be level-headed. You have to be able to deal with crises and be able to make decisions. Well, these are the traits that we look for in cybersecurity. People who can handle multiple sets of information all coming in at the same time, being able to prioritize them, and then being able to deal with people and have empathy and be able to support a person and to deal with the issue, both technically, but also from the human aspect.
Wow.
And so we find nurses are actually really, really good in cybersecurity professions. And another interesting area is neurodiversity. So in traditional computing circles, we often perhaps think of people in computing as being a little obsessed, a little bit of attention to detail. And these are traits
really,
we often see with neurodiversity. And we've actually seen that people with particularly neurodivergent characteristics can perform really well in cybersecurity when they have to have a very high level of attention to detail and be very focused on the task at hand. So it really is a career for almost everybody.
And I have another question. That's really interesting. I really love that because that's something new for me as well. The nurses example. That's I think that's
teachers as well is another good
profound.
one. But nurses are great.
and that I think for the Sri Lankan audience, that's something new that will be new as well. Something to think about. Really, is like why would you said that the nurses are really good as well as teachers, but why would anybody want to get into cyber? Is it financially rewarding as well?
Absolutely. I mean, in terms of career progression in the nursing domain, there are limited opportunities. So as you go further up the tree, there's fewer and fewer positions. Cyber is in a growth phase. So cyber is desperately looking for more people. And in all honesty, we have a lot of technical people already. There's a lot of people who are able to deal with the zeros and ones and address the underlying technical problems. And where we're short of people is in that sort of human factors aspect, being able to deal with individuals. And yes, it is potentially very lucrative. So salaries for cybersecurity specialists is on the increase. and that includes in Sri Lanka. And also, usefully for many people, the salaries are typically paid in USD. So the conversion rates.
So can somebody work with with the global companies living in Sri Lanka? Is that possible?
Absolutely. In fact, I was talking today with our new industrial consultative committee at ECU Sri Lanka, and we had a number of representatives there who engage with multinational corporations with workforces that are remote. They're working from Sri Lanka remotely for other organizations, and other people working outside of Sri Lanka working for organizations here. It really has no borders. And the nature of cybersecurity being a global problem means that there is a global demand for specialists. And once you get beyond the sort of entry level, there's a global market, and people are in very, very high demand and are getting snapped up internationally.
If I was a nurse wanting to now, having listened to you, and wanting to get to cyber, where should I start?
So the starting point is really to decide if it really is for you. And that might sound a bit scary, but there are some very easy approaches to it. So the first is to go off and do some of the free courses. So go online, find some basic computing courses just to see if the sort of technology frightens you away. But then have a look at the information security courses. So again, if I think of the Cisco offering, they have an introduction to cybersecurity. And then there are follow-on courses for those who want to specialize a little bit more. Just doing the introductory course, if after studying that for a few days to a few weeks, you find that you have a passion and an interest, go on and explore a bit more. If you run screaming from it after 15 minutes, then it's not the career for you. But I would suggest a little bit of perseverance, because it is a culture shock. If you've come from a non-technology discipline or a non-technology career, it's going to be very alien. The language is different. The acronyms are everywhere.
But that's the same for a lot of jobs, isn't it? Even in nursing,
I
remember,
remember,
in the hospital, we were using sort of acronyms that nobody knows, and it's the same for a doctor to lawyer to every job. It's just, as you said, it's that perseverance and getting to know little by little, chipping away. And I remember me coming to computing in the first place. I was a hotelier, so I came from a non-technical, non-computing background, and developed over the years. It's been about at least 10 to 12 years now. Mm-hmm. And I discovered my passion towards information security at my when I did the undergraduate degree. It was information security, not cyber. Cyber wasn't discovered just yet. But as you say, so it's about exploring. It's about thinking sort of like outside the box. And for a country like Sri Lanka, I think a lot of people are these days trying to get out of the country, look for the opportunities, but you don't necessarily have to do that, because these kind of areas provide those opportunities for you to stay home with your loved one, with your families, and then earn in dollars, as you said. Thank you for that as well. And that's, I think, is really will be valuable for the audience. And it's so just tell us a bit about what you do in Sri Lanka.
So I've been visiting Sri Lanka now for nearly 8 years. So it goes back to 2016 when I made my first visit here. And I've actually had connections with Sri Lanka further back than that. So when I was in the UK, we had a transnational education partnership. So we had a partner in Sri Lanka who was offering the computing degrees from the University of Plymouth.
I remember you coming with Bogdan, wasn't it?
So I actually never made it to Sri Lanka as part of the Plymouth University activities. However, I bumped into Plymouth colleagues when I've been visiting in recent years, and including Bogdan from Plymouth. But it was really when I moved to Australia, and ECU has a long-standing relationship with Sri Lanka. And it goes back over 20 years. So for 20 years, we were partnered with ACBT, and we were offering the computer science course for a very long time. And that was sort of nicely going along, but it wasn't growing to any significant level. So in my early days of visits, I was coming over to do orientation activities and to support the staff who were delivering the courses here in Colombo. But over time, we decided to expand our offering, and a year ago we launched our official campus. So ECU Sri Lanka is now a physical campus here in Colombo, and is host to a significant and growing number of students. So we now offer the Bachelor of Computer Science, a computer science degree with specializations in software engineering and cybersecurity. And that's a course that we offer as a full degree here in Colombo. And about 2 years ago, we also introduced the Bachelor of Science Cybersecurity, so a dedicated cybersecurity degree. And that has been offered now for a couple of years with growing numbers, and is really targeting the slowly emerging cybersecurity sector here in Sri Lanka. It is slowly developing, but we're seeing quite a bit of rapid growth recently as large organizations begin to really take cybersecurity seriously. And today we held our first industry consultative committee meeting with representatives from companies around Colombo, and that included staff from the Sri Lanka CERT. So we really are tapping into the leading minds in Sri Lanka and those who are informing policy, and those individuals are now informing the activities that are happening in our campus here. So we're really looking to generate the next generation of cybersecurity defenders for Sri Lanka.
So do your students get to meet some of those prospective employers as well? Do you facilitate that kind of linkages as well for students?
Absolutely. So from day one, I'm actually here doing the orientation tomorrow. And one of the first things that I talk about is the fact that a degree is not enough.
Yes.
Studying a degree is part of the equation, but getting out there into industry, connecting with the professional societies. And one of the things that we've been very proactive in doing is having guest speakers from industry. So in the meeting this morning, I was told that we actually had 15 guest presentations over the last semester. And we're looking to grow that to at least 30 per year. And in addition, we're trying to establish more visits to industry. So we had a tour of Vitusa earlier this year to have a look around their facility. I actually talked there earlier in the year when I did my last visit and did a guest lecture for their staff. So we're trying to build those connections with industry, not because I need more contacts in Sri Lanka, but because those contacts then can be leveraged to support the students as they build their careers. So absolutely from day one, it's about extending your reach beyond the campus. So connecting with all the local industry that you can.
That prompted another question in my head, of course. For those people who are well established in their professions, any profession, how do you see cybersecurity relates to them? We know that they're end users, but how should they tackle it? What are the areas that they should think about when you're talking about cybersecurity? Because you said earlier, and I agree, that cybersecurity is everyone's problem. Mm-hmm. So if it is everyone's problem, as a doctor, engineer, or a lawyer, or any profession, what should they do to learn, or how should they relate cybersecurity into their professions?
So in most organizations of a reasonable size, you'll often have an internal IT department. You might even have a cybersecurity team. And so individuals, employees in an organization will often have organizational level cybersecurity guidelines, maybe even training. So obviously the first thing to do is to comply with those requirements. But I actually think it's a really good idea for people to uplift their skill sets more generally. And again, that could go back to the external courses that are available, again, for free online. But I think really acting as a mentor is a fundamental. So we have individuals in organizations who are a bit more aware of cybersecurity, and they can be a champion for cyber. They can talk to the staff, particularly the junior staff who are just starting in their careers. So we find that if you take cyber seriously in an organization, and if you lead from above, so it's got to be clearly demonstrated by the leadership of any organization that cyber is an important part of the success of the business, because we know what happens when it goes wrong. But that then tends to propagate downwards and outwards. So as it works its way down through the staff within the organization, if it's done properly, it then leads out from the organization, and you start to influence your private lives of the employees, but also their personal connections. As people start to behave in a more secure manner, it tends to breed more security.
So you're talking about creating that culture.
Absolutely. So security culture in big organizations is critical these days, but I think it's something that we're beginning to see at the grassroots level. So even the one-man band organizations, you might literally have 2 or 3 employees. You should still be thinking about cybersecurity from day one. And it doesn't mean investing lots of money. It's first and foremost about awareness and education. And then it's about practice, actually practicing the things that you say and the things that you recommend, or the advice that you give, or the rules that you create. It's not just about creating the rules, it's about living by them.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. This is becoming really interesting, even for me, to be honest. And I'm really enjoying it, I must say. And so what are your plans for the ECU's plans for Sri Lanka? If you can share a little bit with us.
Growth, and more growth. So I think the key thing for us is that we have got a new campus here. And what we started off with was just a small number of course offerings. So first and foremost, we're trying to grow the offering here in Sri Lanka. So we're currently the only international campus with a location here. So whilst there's lots of partnerships here, we have the first Australian campus. And for us, that is an opportunity to lead in this space. And as part of that, we need to have a much broader range of offerings. Now, starting up a campus in another country is a big undertaking. It's a massive investment. And we've actually kitted out an entire campus. And that is everything from the building refurb through to all the laboratories. And, we have built a campus.
Wow.
But it's only the beginning. And at the moment, for example, in the computing area, we only offer 2 courses. And one of the areas that we're looking to grow, for example, is data science. So we see that there's a lot of opportunity in Sri Lanka to grow in that particular area and to offer that in the not too distant future. But again, that is only the beginning. The next big phase would be to look at postgraduate. So currently we're offering undergraduate degrees, but there's going to be a huge market for reskilling, uplifting, and for higher education, both for our graduates, but also for graduates from other institutions around Sri Lanka.
So for professionals who want to further their knowledge and skill set.
Absolutely. But also we're opening up for international students.
Oh.
So this is, again, something quite unique at the moment. And there's lots of challenges surrounding it. But we actually have the ability to, through the government here, we've registered ECU Sri Lanka to educate international students. So
that again, that's fascinating to me, because every time we hear that our politicians talk, we hear that everyone's leaving the country. If you want a good education, you have to go to another country. And that's the sort of over and over every day we hear that. And that's what people believe. So what you're saying is on the ground level, that's not true. No. So things are happening where you could have the same quality, international quality. And in fact, you're creating spaces where other countries can come here, and that's going to generate another income for the officially bankrupt country here.
It could be quite significant. So we're seeing a little bit of a slowdown in Australia with international numbers, and looking to the Sri Lanka campus as a pathway for students, particularly in this region, to be able to move into an Australian educational system. And as you commented, it is the same experience, it's the same curricula, it's the same degree as you would get onshore in Australia, but obviously targeted at a Sri Lankan audience, and also importantly, priced at a Sri Lankan rate, which makes a huge difference to the student community here.
Even the living costs in Australia, it's, as we know, you can't compare the two, because when we come from the UK, we convert pounds and we laugh, and because it is for us it's good, but unfortunately for Sri Lankans living here, it's not so. But equally, having to send your daughter or your son to Australia, UK, Canada, whichever the country, is a huge expense that people would do at any cost out of desperation at the minute. Yeah. So you all are changing that landscape here. That's really music to my ears.
So it's something that we have a great passion for. We're obviously wanting to get students into Australia as well, But we do recognise that this is a significant constraint in Sri Lanka and indeed in many other countries as well. So the ability to be able to offer the educational experience, the degree earning capability here in country is also a return to Sri Lanka. And so hopefully we're going to uplift the intellectual capacity in the country, uplift the skills capability, and doing so in a way that the country can actually afford. And given that there's going to be a continued demand for people in country, particularly with the brain drain that we're seeing leaving Sri Lanka, we need that constant stream of new capability, new staffing in country to support it. So hopefully we're part of that solution.
I really hope people in the governments and those areas will hear this message, to be honest, because this is really important and this is something really new. I didn't know that was happening here as well. So, but I don't know much about Sri Lankan internal the workings. However, I know that everyone's anticipating a new beginning. Hopefully, those people who are trying or wanting to do that difference, I really hope that they will support people like you, your organizations, to do this and take the country to the next level, because resources, and I mean, as you said, it's a beautiful country. My son brought two of his best mates to the country just after their GCSEs, and they wanted to tour the country. So I've been covering half the country. That's where you saw that the elephant attack on Facebook. But it's everywhere I go. I'm like, oh gosh, what a beautiful resource this is, and then we're wasting it. And it's like, who's going to take it? Can we take it to the next level? And I think SLVLOG team is trying just to do that and changing that mindset. And I think with international partners like yourselves, it's becoming a possibility, and it's great to hear. And we want to do as much as possible to bring the country back up. Thank you. On that note, Professor Dowland, thank you so much for your time today and for agreeing to do this with me. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you so much.
My absolute pleasure. I always love coming to Sri Lanka, and it was delightful to have this opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
ලිෆ්ට් එකට ගිහින් ඉවරලා මට කනට කරලා කිව්වා ෆින්ගර්ප්‍රින්ට් එක 100% ටැලි ඊ ඇරියා නම් කෙලිය නේද කියලා. අපිට එතකොට DNA වාර්තා ඇවිල්ලා තිබුණේ නැහැ. බ්ලඩ් ප්‍රින්ට් එකක් තිබුණේ ලේ ගෑවුනේ කොහොමද තමුගේ ෆින්ගර්ප්‍රින්ට් එකේ කියලා ප්‍රශ්න කරා.